Hello all, and this video is going to look at how phenomenology as a method really becomes the dominant philosophical, or at least rigorous method that is used throughout Europe and really influences the Catholic tradition in America, certainly among the Roman Catholic theists. So, as we've looked with regards to the early existentialists with Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and their concerns through self-actualization, if you will, by looking at it through the lens of introspective psychology, we now want to turn to what these sort of existential problems, these these woes, as it were, through the lens of an actual method and creative unpacking of what makes conscious experience possible. And so the sort of existentialist phenomenology, if you will, or at least the usage of its method, is widely used with very famous European thinkers such as Heidegger and Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty. It really, of course, it originates through Husserl's project of using the method of the transcendental ego as a means of understanding those conscious structures of that creativeness. And so if we're going to round the sort of influences, of course, out of his method, which we'll look at later, he has influence over people such as Gadamer, who uses phenomenology for hermeneutics and the subjectiveness of interpretation, as opposed to the objectiveness, as we'll talk about later. And of course, you merge that with Nietzsche's deconstruction, and you have many different French philosophers at the time using these hermeneutics of interpretation. And of course, this just goes beyond simply sort of theology of interpretation, but it applies to the sciences, to history, to literature, to reading philosophy together on a channel, or sort of interpretation of these things. So it's widely influential, to say the least. But among the other influences, as I've mentioned, you have the return of Thomism, with Aquinas really re-emerging with the Thomistic studies throughout Europe, which is actually a really interesting story about Husserl's philosophy really ending up influencing so much of the Catholic theists at the time, because, of course, when the Nazis were burning literature, word had got out, and so Husserl's books were sent to Belgium. And it's kind of interesting to look at how in history there's these events that happen that nobody really can account for how things will turn out. Like who could have thought that eventually this would lead to John Paul II doing phenomenological studies using Husserl's method, and that all starts back with World War II and the book burnings and whatnot. If this never got to Belgium and academia there, then who knows if Husserl would be so well known. But Husserl himself is trying to inject a new foundationalism out of the phenomenological in the structures of consciousness. In his critiques, we can kind of lay out what he's really trying to do with this method. If we were going to look back at Nietzsche, of course, Nietzsche has a description of introspective psychology as how we arrive to the conclusions of the rational as he takes apart the Enlightenment with him and Kierkegaard and concerns of the rational. They're using that psychological process to understand how the rational really isn't so rational, of course. But for Husserl, he takes aim at naturalism and these different isms or explanations for the foundations of human experience. And so if we were going to perhaps lay this out across the board here, he's really taking the aim at something that is subjective, having a sort of objectiveness implied through presuppositions of this psychological process. So objectivist explanations that exclude human subjectivity and the creativity of our inner resources. And so these presuppositions of psychology, of natural sciences, of even mathematics, naturalism fails to account for the creativeness of organizing the actual human experience, which is what Husserl's trying to get at. You can have sociological, certainly the cultural explanation, or even the historicism, but of course this comes with presuppositions that all of these things can just be explained through the disciplines. And so his phenomenology of the transcendental ego wants to supersede all of these particulars of cultural explanations of these presuppositions about objective truth, and find a new way of having a radical foundation of doing all of these things. He's taking the Kantian categories of unity of our perception, really, and using it as for the Copernican revolution. He wants to use Kant's insight about these categories of our understanding, and use that for a description of human experience that goes past all of these suppositions prior. And that is what we'll look at with Husserl going forward in the next video with his transcendental ego through a rigorous philosophical system. So yeah, this was just a short video really of looking and passing the torch from the early concerns of the existentialists towards, as we'll see, a methodology and the different ways that method is going to be used with Sartre and Heidegger, and certainly their different takes towards Husserl's own thoughts on these things. Certainly on this channel you'll remember with Heidegger is obviously very influential towards me with things such as scientism, and you can see here with Husserl and his critiques of naturalism and psychology and these disciplines that are trying to be objective. You can see that influence here for Heidegger, certainly, who was, of course, a student. But yeah, this video is just going to brush up on phenomenology, in that Hegelian tradition becoming an actual method here in the 20th century, or at least a more rigorous one. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys are enjoying these videos, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and keep the retention going, I guess.